That's not it.
Certainly is.
Isn't.
Is.
Try again.
All
Hold
right,
on.
here you are.
Booker, we've got to stop them.
No, that's the E.
No,
Booker,
that is
hurry.
certainly it.
Here.
No, it's not.
It is.
Isn't.
Is.
Isn't.
Is.
Try again.
No, you try.
Fine.
Stop it!
Fine.
Stop it! You don't
Here
know
you
what
are.
you're doing!
Nope, that was not it.
Ha! There it is. You've done it now. He's coming back. He's coming back.
The notes were correct.
The instrument was not.
One needs both to get his attention.
But if you know how to sing to him,
He will take you where you need to go.
Who are you?
we are where we are needed.
And needed where we are.
So Comstock uses these songs. Are there others we can use? Something to keep the bird off our back?
Perhaps you should ask the maestro himself.
So where is he? Of course. Well, at least they left the piano.
Booker. That's Comstock House. If we're gonna find him, we should start there.
The Vox are coming! We need to leave the dock! We need to push off immediately!
Where are these people going?
Wherever the Vox Populi ain't.
Close your eyes and jump. You can do it. Come on, you can do it. Just jump. Jump. Come on, jump.
I cannot do it. I'm sorry. I love you, but I can't do it. I'm sorry.
You need to remove your...
I'm not really sure how he expects her to jump on there. No, you know, that's pretty far. Why aren't they should move that thing a little closer to the edge. That would be helpful. That's my opinion. Anyway, yeah, hi, welcome back, Bioshock Infinite. We're back. We out here. So now we're in a kind of weird, like, middle section of the game. I guess it's not really the middle. We're past the middle of the game at this point. I forgot how, like, relatively short this game is, really. I think it's just because, like, well, for one thing, I don't know how many videos it's gonna end up taking, but it looks like it won't be taking very much, or very many. And, I was just surprised at how few I think it's going to end up being, because I, spend a lot of time doing shit like this where I die and am fighting a trillion enemies, and also just like looking around and finding stuff. This run, there's going to be another one, I think in a video or two, of one of the side quests. I haven't gotten all of them, but I've done a few of them, and, they're not amazingly interesting or anything. They don't really lead to anything that amazing, but they are neat, and this is the first time that I've ever really done them when playing through this game. But anyway, we're at a point in the game where we're gonna be doing a lot of walking around and exploring and finding things and listening to explanations of things. Because this is the part where, now that we are in this alternate history where Columbia has been taken over by the evil Vox Populi, now we are piecing together the history of Columbia, the history of Elizabeth, and how all of this came to be.
Look at this. Fitzroy's no better than Comstock. Was she?
Once people get their blood up, it ain't easy to settle it down again.
This is on our hands, isn't it?
And I don't want to belabor the whole, Daisy Fitzroy did nothing wrong. This game unjustly equates her with Zachary Comstock. Once again, Elizabeth just did, saying that she was no better than Comstock because she and the other Vox scalped people like Jeremiah Fink, Comstock himself, other founders, the other sort of imperial powers of Columbia. And again, like I said, I don't want to belabor this point too much, but I just want to reiterate how asinine that is to me. And not only, and I don't do that, I don't want to reiterate that because I love to shit on this game or because I hate this game or anything. I like this game. But because that understanding of social movements, that understanding of politics, that approach to politics and political morality is very mainstream in modern American society. Excuse me. And I just think it's interesting that this game is positions itself as something of a critique of American nationalism, capitalism, imperialism, etc., all those things intertwined. But ultimately takes the position, as I've said before, that, you know, literally enslaving and brutalizing people and exploiting them for their labor to enrich yourself. We're going to see in a little bit when we go into the Bank of Colombia the extent to which Colombia enriched himself not only on the backs of people like Daisy, but on all of the citizens of Colombia and all of the people who worked under him. That system, that the system of colonialism and imperialism of America in real life that Colombia is tied to, I mean, Colombia is considered a part of America that secedes and becomes its own thing, but is like a monument to American imperial power and white supremacy, that those things are all, that those things are morally equivalent to a group that it wants to overthrow that immoral power structure by any means necessary, up to and including violence. And again, maybe you watching this, you disagree, and that's, I mean, I guess, I won't say it's okay with me, necessarily, but there's nothing I can do about it. You can think whatever you want. But I think it's pretty clear who is in the moral right in this power dynamic. I think this sort of part of the game, the end of the Vox Populi section and the beginning of this section of, you know, wandering around, and you're going to see that this section of the game is going to concern itself primarily with the fate of Lady Comstock. The end of that section into the beginning of this section is the weakest part of the game narratively for me. Precisely because, as I said before, it doesn't really have a coherent imagining of what a group like the Vox Populi would do. They just do wanton destruction, and the game treats it as if they hate the founders, and their hate for the founders is just as invented and not, like, you know, just for the purpose of, like, personal gain as, you know, the institution of slavery and white supremacy, which is just an entirely incoherent understanding of even the alternate, you know, the fictionalized version of history that this game presents.
Tells me they're not exactly what they appear.
I was going to have told you they'd come.
No,
The subjunctive?
that's not the subjunctive.
I don't think the syntax has been invented yet.
It would have had to have been.
Had to have had been. That can't be right.
They seem to want to help.
They seem to be out of their
Odd,
minds.
isn't it?
What's odd?
The fact that we sometimes...
Finish each other's sentences?
Exactly.
It would be odder if we didn't.
How do you suppose they manage that?
I'll get back to you after I figure out the floating city bit. Come on. Comstock House is up ahead.
The seed of the prophet shall set the throne. He was grooming me, wasn't he?
Comstock? Yeah, I think so.
And why lock me up?
I'm guessing you didn't want to be groomed. Maybe you had something in the works.
Thought they'd stay on top.
I guess there are some times where when you overhear enemies and are about to start a combat part, it just kind of cuts off the story dialogue. But yeah, that was pretty easy. Usually, just two quick shots to the head is all you need in this game. If it's just regular enemies with no head coverings or anything. It's like an Irishman. That's all how Frank Sheeran does all the executions. Is he just walks by and does 2 quick shots to the head. I feel like 2 shots to the head. In my knowledge, super extensive, obviously, knowledge of organized crime and murder.
Take a look at this.
I would think that you would want to do 1 so that it would look like, just someone, just like, whatever. But I guess, there's one part where they give him 2 shots to the face and then they go back and like litter him with bullet holes. So I guess it's like to send a message or whatever. I don't know. Mob dynamics. But yeah, just to finish what I was saying, because the game has moved on really from its sort of dealing with the Vox Populi for the most part. But it seems to me that Ken Levine shares the very common American misunderstanding of anarchism. I would call the Vox an anarchist group. And it's strange because he posits the problem, I think, with this anarchist, leadership that we have here, or I guess lack of leadership that we have in this scenario here, as being bad because of the disorder. Whereas, Comstock, or Columbia, there was order, but there was something sinister underneath it, or behind it. And I don't know, that just... I don't know how I feel about that. And it's also wrong. It's also not what anarchism is. It's not just complete disorder. The game's creators can't imagine what the Vox being in power would actually be like, because... I mean, Ken Levine and the people that developed the story for this game, and most of the people making media and writing stories to begin with, they've all grown up in the sort of, late capitalist indoctrination that we all have about what's normal and what's not, and what's possible politically and socially and what's not, and what the motivations of different social movements are. And different political entities are. And I'm not the first one to point it out, but in general, like, I forget who was the first person pointing it out. I know that Mark Fisher talks about it in Capitalist Realism and a lot of lectures of his. I love hitting them from behind something with the melee weapon. I know that he talks about it, but I don't know who was the first one. I think it might have, like, Jameson even might have mentioned it originally, but basically that in late capitalism, as sort of neoliberal capitalist cultural hegemony deepens and widens across the entire world in the era of, globalization and the financialization of the economy and of media, that we are increasingly unable to imagine alternative societies. There's an famous old adage of it's easier for most people to imagine the apocalypse than to imagine the end of capitalism. Just because it's so thoroughly part of our lives. And I don't just mean in terms of who controls not only the means of production and distribution, but the flow of information for the most part. But not only that in the practical material part of it, but also in our day-to-day life and how we think of things, how we conceive of things. The capital sort of like accumulating profit mode of thinking has been applied to so many areas of life that even just a few decades ago it would be unheard of, even on in America's mainstream right-wing circles, to be something that we would apply that logic to, such as education or you know, even, I mean, you look at stuff like people like McKinsey and consulting and how just everything is about, you know, growth and not sustainability. Yeah, I mean, growing up in that, there's all sorts of, not only explicitly in the media and enforced and codified in law, but just cultural ideas and norms that, you know, influence what we think, you know, what we think our society is, what we think is moral in our society, what we think the state's obligation to its people is, or are. You know, all of those things make, I would say, the vast majority of people in America probably don't like capitalism in its parts. They probably have a lot of problems, the majority of people, with, you know, the actual effects and results of modern neoliberal capitalism and just the status quo of the last 50 years. But I think most of them would defend it because it is the way things are, and we have been conditioned to accept it as the way things are and the only way things ever could be. And the fact that it's now globalized and that, you know, we have all of these very complex financial instruments tied to everything in the economy all around the world that are pretty deliberately made to be very, very difficult to understand for the average person. That just is a self-fulfilling and a self-reinforcing prophecy of, well, no, you see, there's just too many moving parts, there's just too many things, it's too complicated, so even if we wanted to have this more equitable and not excessively privatized society, it would just be too hard. And of course that is, you know, one of the biggest arguments from anybody who wants to appear socially conscious but also has a vested interest in upholding the status quo, which is obviously the vast majority of people in power. So, yeah, I'm probably preaching to the choir on all of this, but I think it's interesting for one thing, and I think it's very apparent in this game's story. You know, I'm always one to, you know, capitalist realism is one of the most interesting concepts introduced in the last decade to me. Or I guess it's a little bit older than that, but it's been more thoroughly kind of expounded upon in the last decade. And it's one of the most interesting concepts to me, and I find myself thinking about it with most of the modern media that I consume in some capacity, and this is a great example of it, of the way that the ideology of capitalism reinforces itself, even if the creators think that they are making a critique of capitalism, or even if it is a critique of capitalism. There's a great passage in some of Fisher's writing about how, you know, anti-capitalist messages are, you know, embraced in capitalist societies to a degree because, you know, they don't, it kind of obscures the appearance of hegemony, but ultimately the sum of everything will, you know, normalize a lot of aspects of capitalist society and everything. I'm gonna shut up for a minute so you can take some of this stuff in. This is just some extra stuff, but it's interesting.
Window not into prophecy, but probability. But his money means the Lutece field could become the Lutece tear, a window between worlds, a window through which you and I might finally be together.
So this is what most... Yay, someone's coming downstairs. This is what most of this part of the game is. It's, you know, wandering around exploring these areas, and I would love to keep the exploration part of it unedited for the most part, but a lot of it is just walking around and searching things, and most of it is just money. I'm not sure why, but there's just, like, silver eagles out the ass in this part of the game. Like, I'm always scrounging for ammo. Like, by the end of this section, I'm almost completely out of ammo. It's very spread out in this part of it, and I'm always having to go back for more. I don't know if you saw during that sped up fight that I talked over, but I talked over it because it was, I mean, that was like a 25-minute excursion of just going back and forth, healing and everything.
Sally! The bastard snuck in while the Vox was shooting up the place and took my girl! Got her locked up in the salty oyster, his hidden closet he keeps all his treasures. Just need to hit the button under the register to open it, but...
Yeah, so this is a little side quest, and it sounded like a pretty simple one, so I decided I would do it, but you have to deal with these fuckers first. And yeah, this is why this part of the game can get a little bit frustrating, or like kind of monotonous, is because not only, it would be one thing if you just have to go around, walk around, and explore, that, you know, I would be fine with that, but literally every time you go into a new area or a new room, you have to fight some enemies, and sometimes it's just like this, where it's just like 2 or 3 of them, and they come out and they go like, "Ah, cut your fucking fingers off!" and then you shoot them twice and they die like that. But sometimes they throw a big guy at you, or they just have 45 enemies, and takes forever, and it depletes your ammo, and then you have to go back and refill it a bunch of times, and it just takes forever to move like 2 inches, all for you to just go up and press F on something and be like, huh, and then have to go back in the other direction. So yeah, it can be kind of a monotonous little thing. This guy had no fucking idea he was there. I was just taking a little jaunt around the corner, and he was just suddenly there. Man, Shock Jockey really is the GOAT for me, let me tell you. And then I wasn't fucking with these guys, I was just running away. I deal with them later, I cut all that shit out. There's just a lot of, you know, bullshit. No need to really show it off. But yeah, this is what you get for in here. I had never done this before. You get an infusion, which is nice. Those are helpful. This is me being an indecisive fuck right now. I ultimately go for the health most of the time, for the health upgrades, because your boy be getting shot.
I think I knew her. Worked at a bar on Houston Street.
I bet you did. You hold on to this.
So this vigor is neat, return to sender. It allows you to absorb people's damage, enemies' damage, and then fling it back at them. I have not really mastered it. I try it a little bit later, and it doesn't really work all that well for me. I need to practice with it a little more. Because like I said, I've never been in this room, so I've never like tried this vigor before, but I thought I would give it a shot. And yeah, this is just me fucking with everything.
You have been transfused, brother, into a new reality.
This isn't a super important Vox phone, really.
Through confusion and hemorrhage. But we are together, and I...
yeah, there more stuff about the Lutece twins will be explained later on. But I just want to say, for my final word on the whole Vox Populi thing, until a little bit later, I know there's going to be like one more, a little comment that's going to, you know, be worth exploring a little bit, but not for a little while. But I just want to say, for anyone who doesn't know what, you know, the actual tenets of anarchism is, the most general way that I've heard it described is that it is the rejection of all illegitimate hierarchies. And obviously that's open to some very, you know, varying interpretations. That's why there are many different, you know, schools of thought on anarchism. Could go into it, but we're getting a little bit late in the game here. But yeah, capitalist realism, it is alive and well. It is, as Mark Fisher says, a parasite in our minds. And it's a parasite in Ken Levine's mind, and that is part of why, like many storytellers in our day, he is unable to have a really coherent understanding of the political and social ideas and movements that this story talks about in, you know, in a realistic way. Not even in realistic, but just in a way that actually makes sense and juxtaposes them against each other in a way that makes sense. Anyway, enjoy this little bit here with the bird.
Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you...
Promise me.
I will stop him.
That is an oath you cannot keep. But promise me that if it comes to it, you will not let him take me back.
It won't come to that. All right?